Okay, next is the Coastial Troops. The recon. Resvedka, if memory serves. Shoot, what does Resvedka mean? I'm sorry, I'm gonna look that up. That's going to bug me if I don't. Resvedka. Oh wait, no, that's the wrong thing. Okay, so basically it means like intelligence. So, scouts. Alright, that makes sense. Spetsnaz VMF. What is VMF? Also, apparently there is a such thing as a PKP bullpup. Alright. SVUAS. PKP bullpup. I'm guessing that's what that is. ADS. Oh wow, you can make them way more expensive and set them up for fire support with 2 of these and 2 of these. Okay. And the PDSS, which is kind of, sorta, not really Russian SEALs. Or you can give them a bunch of grenade launchers. I think I'd probably stick with the rifles, though. This is also the only amphibious infantry squad in the game. So. VMF. What does VMF stand for? I think that's like Russian Navy. I am not sure. Yeah, it's Russian Navy. And then you've got this, which is basically an MTLB chassis. From my understanding, it's an MTLB chassis, or a modified MTLB chassis, with... It's got a laser rangefinder. Again, it's basically kitted out as a artillery observation vehicle. If memory serves, this thing also, yes, had the V designation, 1V. V is for, like, observation and scout, I believe. I'm a little bit fuzzy on my Russian vehicle nomenclature. You can also include an MRU system, which increases the visual range, but it also removes the machine gun. So, then I kind of like having the machine gun. Where the heck did that come from? Then we have the BRDM-2. You know, if I'm going to be entirely honest, I kind of like the BRDM series. I think they're cute. This is actually a modified BRDM. It's a later version. Oh, well, you can tell that because there's 2M there. But another way you can tell is that it has these side doors. And the early BRDM versions had 4 extra wheels that were normally held lifted up and only lowered when you needed to cross rough terrain, but that made the inside of the vehicle rather cramped. Instead, you've got something like this where you have these extra side doors in place of those wheels at the cost of some terrain crossing capability. It'd be kind of interesting if we could get the wheels back for an increase in off-road speed to make it one of the few wheel, because the way the wheeled vehicles work in this game is that they have lower off-road speed than they only have they have higher on-road speeds than tracked vehicles, but they have slower off-road speeds. Usually, these ones actually have the same off-road speed, but generally a wheeled vehicle is only limited to half its maximum speed off-road than it is on-road, whereas a regular tracked vehicle is limited to something like, I think is only limited to, it's like, yeah, 25% of its is limited to 75% of its off-road speed, or it's on-road, because it's still faster on-road, but off-road it's only limited to 75% of its on-road speed instead of 50% of its on-road speed like wheeled vehicles are. And, oh, we have an armor package. You can up-armor it and give it smoke, but that removes the ability to swim. Okay. Also makes it healthier. Optic systems on the turret so you can see farther. And then we have a weapons package including a cord with an AGS-17. I don't know why you'd have a cord and a PKT, but you do. KPVB, which, if memory serves, is a 23mm autocannon. Yeah, it's a 23mm autocannon. And an AGS-17. Overall, that's not a bad scout platform. If it's a little expensive, I suppose you can drop the armor package, but that's not bad. I like it. So, then you have a BTR-90. This has a 2A42, PKT, and Conkers. Decent pen, decent range. That's not bad. You can up-armor it, and it retains its ability to swim. I find that very interesting. The Rostok turret with a grenade launcher. And the Bahachka U turret, which is basically just the turret off of a BMP-3. Which makes the vehicle an interesting quasi-fire support platform. Although it doesn't have any stealth, and then the Berserk turret, which does get you Cornets. They're not Cornet M's, the regular Cornets, but still. So if I'm going to be entirely honest, I kind of wish this thing was in the Is that the PKT back there? No, it's got a no, that's the grenade launcher, AGS-30. I kind of wish this thing was in the motorized infantry specialization. You could either pick between this, the BTR-82, or the K-16. Because the fact that it seems to be limited to recon is meh. Although I kind of like the idea of having this as a sort of quasi-fire support platform. So. 100 points. Actually, that's like 75 points, and it can't swim with the armor. That's like 135 points. It can swim. It has active protection system, but it isn't as heavily armored. Yeah. Alright. So, that's that. Then we have infantry. RSGH-1. Get a thermobaric launcher. So, assault infantry from the... No. Oh! Okay, hang on. This used to be a 14-man squad. Okay. Because this used to be a 14-man squad, roughly comparable to Marine Raiders. And in this current configuration, it's basically assault infantry. Okay, that's interesting. Or you can give them a grenade launcher, which seems to make them more or less assault focused. And you can apparently airdrop them, which is kind of interesting. Well, I say they're assault focused. They're kind of assault focused. Not really. Kinda, sorta. Alright. But all the other squads are 7-man. And then you have Mountaineers, who, from the looks of it, prioritize staying at range. Wow, that is a short-range Metz. Is that like a base Melts? Like, good grief, that is short. There's something else Russian that is the Melts in it. This thing. No, that's a big... Oh my, that is short too. How did I miss that? This has the Melts M with a longer active range and more pen. Or you can go with the Melts M1 with an even longer range and better pen. Okay. Huh. Because this thing had a Melts... Oh no, it has a faggot. No, I'm thinking of the Sarmat, aren't I? Yeah, this thing has a Melts M1. Alright. So that's what the regular Melts is like. The regular M1. How did I miss that for the motor rifles? I missed that for with the motor rifles. I guess I did not look at that. Alright. So you have a regular Melts with pretty sucky range. But I think this squad is, if memory serves, it's intended to stay at arm's length? I'm honestly not sure. They're Mountaineers. And then you have your basic infantry here with a rocket launcher. What's interesting is that these guys, originally you could customize them between, I think, the, like a, so there's, okay, well I guess you might want to take the rocket launcher. You get 5 of them. But you can customize them between an RPG-27 or a larger RPG-28. 74M. And then you have a Conquer's team, which you can upgrade to a Conquer's M, which hits harder and does slightly more damage. Okay. I'm trying to think. I believe, was it Melts and Faggot that were designed roughly around the same time to complement each other, and then Conquer's was designed slightly later, and then Cornet was designed in like the late 1980s as a multi-purpose semi-modular platform, but Conquer's didn't actually get off the ground until the mid-90s after the fall of the Soviet Union. Or not Conquer's, Cornet didn't get off the ground. I looked this up yesterday, but I can't remember. And SPG-9 with... I mean, it's a recoilless rifle, even though the game technically considers it a rocket launcher. It's a recoilless rifle. Which I guess an interesting distinction would be to make this stuff not interceptable by APS. So... because the game's treating it like a rocket launcher, interestingly enough. And then we have vehicles. And you might see upcoming, or up here, you might see why they decided to split these guys, to split the squad in half. Honestly, I'm more inclined to take the automatic grenade launcher. You've got this thing, which isn't technically a tank. It's a fire support vehicle. Wait, did he... hang on. Load that again, please. Thank you. And he shoves that in. Okay, that is a very, very nice attention to detail there. Because when he loads it, it looks like he also... or at least he's supposed to be pulling the handle up to close the breech, which I like. I can't remember if the... because I believe that's an MT-10, that 100mm gun, and I can't remember if that has an automatic breech or if it doesn't. So... but it looks like he's supposed to be closing the breech when he inserts the shell. Yeah, because the breech doesn't close when he inserts the shell. And seeing the fact that the devs, that the devs did their research when they made this game, I'm going to go out on a limb and say that the MT-10 100mm anti-tank gun does not have an automatic closing breech. Okay, so that's not great. Heat is actually not bad. And then you have bog standard HE for the Rapara, which I believe is also known as the MT-10. So you basically have a sort of quasi-tank destroyer. I actually read a account from a British tanker. Someone had basically asked what it was. It was in a comment section. Someone had basically asked something to the effect of, "I wonder what it's like to be inside a tank when it gets hit." And someone else responded something to the effect of, I think the person originally asking the question, the specified weapon system, like when it gets hit by another tank or something like that. And the person in the comments basically said, or the response basically said something to the effect of, "I don't know about another tank, but getting hit by a 100mm anti-tank gun sounds like a distant thunk, like someone hitting a pillow followed by the vehicle slightly rocking back and forth. And come to find out, the person who responded was a crewman in a British Challenger 2 in... Or was it a Challenger? I think it might have just been a Challenger 1 in... I'm pretty sure it was a Challenger 1 from the Gulf War in 1991. Because the Challenger 2 didn't enter service until 2003. You can up armor it, which gives it some side skirts. Okay, and slightly extra protection. Doesn't remove its ability to, doesn't remove the ability to, doesn't remove the ability to, it's still amphibious. So these two hydraulics adjust the angle of the blade, and then these two lift it up and down. Okay, that's what I was trying to see. So let me think. You got AT gun. You've got a 57mm autocannon, which still has really good performance. It's another S60, which is, granted, that does appear to be different than what something like the T-15 is equipped with. So. And you can use that on the move, interestingly enough. Or you have a 2A42 with an AGS 30. You can't carry people in this, even though I'm pretty sure this is MTLB or MTLBU. It's got 7 road wheels. Did the LBU have 7? Or was it just the MTLB that had 7? I can't know. I don't know. I guess we'll find out soon enough, because I think the LBU is in the mechanized infantry. And then you have the 2A42 with a pair of Cornets, which again fires 2 per target. They're not Cornet M's, they're just regular Cornets. For a I don't know, you might want the AT gun, because the AT gun does have some decent direct fire capability. That, or I could see why you might want the S60. Even if it wouldn't necessarily be effective against armored vehicles. To be fair though, if you're taking this thing and you're engaging an armored vehicle, you might, well, you're gonna have a lot of things to worry about if you're getting something like a tank with this. This would, however, offer some protection against aircraft. So, but I'd prefer the anti-tank gun. And then you have the BMP-3F, which is specifically a navalized version of the BMP. The BMP-3, rather. Or Shorta, which is what these ears are. It's a jammer. You then have the default, or... Okay, so you've just got like basic HE, or a tube-launched ATGM. Alright, more coax machine guns, for reasons. So you got basic HE and a sort of meh gun-launched ATGM. Or, hang on, 13, 10, 30, 100, 16, 2.5, 12, 10, 30, 100. Okay, so you've got slightly longer range, I guess? Huh. Slightly longer range. And the ATGM's better. Alright. It's still a BMP. Well, I mean, it's still a BMP-3, so you're gonna have some interesting times. Try not to get blown up, I guess. That's the best way to put it. So. Yep. There's the infantry compartment. Wait, really? That's the infantry compartment? Are they expected to lay on top of each other? Okay. Then again, I've never seen the infantry compartment of a BMP, so I don't know. What's this, like 65 base? Yeah, that's not too bad. Well, looks like you got better optics. That's about it. And then you have this, which is basically just a BRDM-2, but with a launcher for Conkers. There it is. You've got 5 of them. You also have anti-infantry versions. Or you can be equipped with Cornets. You have an AGS-30, interestingly enough, and PKT, and again, AGS-30, which I find interesting. Again, 2 missiles per target, but you also have spares, but a pretty long reload time. And then the BT-3F, which is basically just like a BMP-3 but modified, tuned to more of a proper troop transport. The BMP-3, or the BMP-3F rather, is again, it's a navalized version of the BMP-3. The BT-3F is a navalized version of the BT-3, which is, like I said, it's a more modernized troop transport version. It's also worth noting that this is the only vehicle in the deck that could carry these guys without back when there was a 14-man squad. So, and you do have some pretty chunky ERA on here. You can go with a 50 cal on top of the 2 hull-mounted PKTs, or an AP-23 autocannon, which I think is 23mm? Yeah. Honestly, I'd expect it to be larger. I'll have to look up the AP-23. Like, it's smaller than the 50 cal. Alright. That could be a decently tough little APC. BTR-80. It's worth noting that the distinction between the BTR-80 and the BTR-82 is basically this. The BTR-80 is, well, this is what the original BTR-80s look like, with this turret that had a KP-EVT and a PKT in it. It's also worth noting that the BTR-70s were very similar. Well, mostly similar. The BTR-80A is a version with the turret removed and modified with the 30mm autocannon. The BTR-82A is basically a BTR-80 that was built with the 30mm autocannon. So that's the distinction between the BTR-80 and the BTR-82. And you can throw on some armor. In fact, honestly, I think they're pretty similar. Aside from, it looks like some sensor packages, it looks like they're pretty similar. So, yeah. That's the distinction between the BTR-80A and the BTR-82A. The BTR-82 was built from the ground up with a 30mm turret. The BTR-80s were retrofitted with it. And I can also go with an AGS-17. So, yeah. That's some cage armor. You can't swim. Then again, you do have other options in your deck that can swim if you need something that can swim. So. Then you have the PT-76B. This thing was basically a Soviet light tank. I believe it was originally intended for scouting. Also, it is slow. Very slow. You can't upgrade the engine, but even then, it's still kind of... I don't know, well, heck, your off-road speed is the same as your on-road speed with the base engine. It is air-droppable, interestingly enough, so I suppose if you wanted something that you could cart around with your VDV, you can add some extra side armor, which honestly just looks like spaced armor. So, or maybe floats. You're just installing the floats. So that's like, I mean, that's already a 50% increase in price just there. You've then got this, and now you've effectively doubled the price. You've doubled the base price with for a 30mm autocannon. Or you can throw on an AU-220, which I believe is like the S-60s. And here now you've effectively tripled the price. It's worth noting that Russia is actually trying to, because Russia still has the stocks of the PT-76s. At least, I don't think Ukraine has ground through those yet. And this is what Russia wants to do with them: is install a 57mm automatic, a 57mm autocannon, which you do get smoke. This could be an interesting tank support vehicle if you pair it up with things like the Spruts. Sprut SDM. You can't put the ERA, or not ERA, but the cage armor. That's the word I was looking for. You can't put the cage armor on. Actually, the Sprut costs the same as this thing. If you wanted something cheap, you could keep the... You know, that'd actually be an argument for keeping the 76mm. Just as a decent fire support platform. It's got a longer range. So. Actually, in that case, I think I'd keep the 76mm. Although I find it rather amusing that it has slightly more health than the Sprut. You can drop the armor package. something that only costs 40 points. Or 95 points if you still wanted the 57. Granted, it does give you smoke. Eh. Offer an interesting bit of synergy, I guess. Although, you're probably going to want to keep the engine upgrade regardless of what you do. Because otherwise that thing would be slow. Like, really slow. I don't need that. And then you have the T90, or the T80 BV, which I believe is the cheapest tank Russia has access to. And I think is technically the cheapest tank in the game if you don't count the M10. Well, no, it's the same price as the M10 with the 105. If you still consider the M10 to be a tank with the 50 millimeter, then you can argue that the M10 would be cheaper. Technically, it's not a tank if it has a 50 millimeter. And if you really want to make the structure purists mad and consider the MGS a tank, then the MGS is cheaper still. Although if you consider the MGS a tank, you're probably going to be opening an entire can of worms about maybe this thing being considered a tank because that is a large indirect fire gun. And although one thing I will say, speaking of tanks, is for April Fools this year, they showed a version of this armed with the Sprutz turret. And I would honestly love to see that. It's like maybe 150 points, 160 points armed with a Sprutz turret. I think that'd be pretty cool. So, anyway, where was I? Oh yes, the T80. The T80 BV, arguably the cheapest tank in the game. You got the T80 BVM of Presets 2017, the BVM of Presets 2018, and the BVM of Presets 2018 Plus. Ammunition is a giant steaming pile of garbage. Visibility isn't great. Armor isn't great. I mean, it's cheap. That's about the only thing I can, the only good thing I can say for it is that it is cheap. So. Or you can go with the BVM Presets 2017. Which installs what appears to be some Contact 5. You get much better ammunition, you get better armor, much better armor, but your price skyrockets accordingly. Wow, that is, that's not great. So yeah, let's just go with that. We've got Contact 1 bricks. 240, or you can go up to the BVM Presets 2018, which gives you slightly better rear armor. But and slightly better health. And I think it gives you slightly better side armor as well. Okay. Does it also include the top armor? No, it doesn't. And then you have the Presets 2018 Plus. Which increases your side armor even further and gives you an extra bit of health. Huh. You don't even get an ATGM. get like an extra 2 points of health and slightly better side and clear armor. Otherwise, I'm honestly wondering whether or not it's worth it to just keep the BVM version. I mean, you can go with the BVM overs that's 2018 plus if you're so inclined, and granted 270 isn't too much for a tank, but that's just me. What do we got here? Yes, the 2S1. 152mm gun, or 120mm gun rather. It does have some heat. The range is atrocious. Accuracy is equally atrocious. It is airdroppable though, so you can airdrop it with your 120mm mortars, or you could go with the Hosta, which gives you smoke. 2 of 34. The range is slightly shorter. Actually, that's a point. Where is the VDV? $9, $50, $120, $120, $60. $9, $70, $200, $150, $60. Okay, so it's not quite the same. And it does have a longer range than anything you've got here, even if it is more expensive. And you do have a defensive machine gun, which you don't get here. Okay. I suppose that's an interesting option for a relatively cheap artillery system. And you do get guided rounds, which I suppose can help. Next we have the 2S23, which is basically the 2S9's turret. Near as I could tell, it's basically just like a 2S9's turret, but on a BTR-80 chassis. And again, you've got extended range options. You don't have much ammunition though, so that's worth noting. And you do have cage armor if you want to armor up your mortars, which I already explained why you might want to do that. But the long story short is, because since they're a mortar in relatively short range, they'd have to get relatively close to the battle space. And then you have this thing, which uses the same mortar as the Vena. This. The 2S31 uses the same... Well, I see it uses the same mortar. It looks like it uses the same turret. Slightly downgraded version of the turret, maybe. And then you do have more ammunition, much more ammunition available to you. I suppose if you need to, you can go with cluster and then use the precision-guided rounds like quasi-HE, seeing as you don't have the option of equipping both at the same time. Which, okay. I kind of understand why, but still, that's kind of dumb. This thing, however, can swim. And again, you do have a lot of ammunition available. It's like 105 rounds in total, so. And you also have Iskander. The Russian TBM system. Come on. Open up. I want to see you open up. There we go. Thank you. And as you can see, you fired 2 missiles instead of just 1, like on the Tochka. The ballistic missiles are pretty decent, all things considered. Okay. You have an option for cluster now. Alright, that's interesting. And then you have an option for cruise missiles. Ground-launched cruise missiles. Oh, cluster is a slightly larger blast radius. Huh, that's interesting. The ballistic missiles are guided. Laser guided. The cruise missiles, however, have a longer range. Okay. So, and it's worth noting that turns it to the Iskander K, 9M723-1F, 9M723-1K5, 9M728. It's actually worth pointing out that mounting ground-launched cruise missiles is basically illegal under the ABM Treaty. Then again, seeing as the well, I can't say seeing as the ABM Treaty expired in 2019 because Iskander was first developed in 2006. So Russia's development of Iskander was basically illegal under the ABM Treaty. Russia claimed that the weapon systems had a range of less than 500 kilometers or 310 miles, but while that just wasn't true for the cruise missiles, the ballistic missile variants in Ukraine, if memory serves, showed that they had a longer range. And then you have a modified version with this weird section up top. Hang on. I know this guy's name. And this taller frame. And that's because you have 4 cruise missiles, and they appear to be exactly the same. Although I kind of, honestly, if I'm going to be entirely honest, I kind of expected the ladders to extend up further. But, I don't know if the Russians have used any of the cruise missile Iskander versions in Ukraine. But their use of the ballistic missile versions have been notably covered. Personally, I'm more inclined, or I would be more inclined to use the ballistic missile version. Then again, cruise missile. Well, the cruise missile version is very expensive for one. The ballistic missile version isn't nearly as expensive. So. And then you have the A222 Bareg. This is originally, if memory serves, it was intended as a coastal defense artillery piece. Just granted, a concept you don't see much of nowadays. Generally, coastal defense. Did I forget to look at? I did. But generally, coastal defense is a concept covered by ballistic missiles. Or not ballistic missiles, but by anti-ship missiles. So. You also, however, have the option of using like a self-propelled anti-aircraft gun. No high-altitude range, though. It does have a self-defense capability. And, no high-altitude range. What I said earlier about anti-aircraft guns using, like, the ranges between low and high-altitude anti-aircraft guns possibly being better treated more like, missiles, this would be about the only exception I would make. because it is a legitimate gun system. Or you can set it up for multi-purpose with 10 anti-aircraft rounds, and although it would have a long aim time for an anti-aircraft system. Even if that round detonating anywhere near a helicopter is going to do massive damage, it's pretty much going to shoot down pretty much anything. It's going to shoot down pretty much anything that isn't a attack helicopter, and it's severely going to mess up any of those. And again, you have an artillery system. Although, if you just treat it like a howitzer... 130 for the SPAA, 160. Okay. And then you have the Tor M2DT, which is basically it's a Tor. Specifically, it's a Tor M2 with 16 missiles. And this thing can fire on the move, interestingly enough. Multi-target 4. Okay. Semi-active, so they have to be guided in all the way. Or you can go with a Panzer, which can only engage 2 targets and is also semi-active, but I believe has slightly better range. Yes, slightly better range. The missiles also do slightly more damage. The blast radius is much smaller for some reason. Okay. But you have 18 missiles. So. Alright. And then you just have the regular DT-30. This vehicle is basically intended for like Arctic exploration. Thus, you'll note the very wide tracks. And even though the darn thing weighs 30 tons, it can actually swim. It's not very fast on or off-road, so it doesn't really matter, but it is designed to go pretty much anywhere. And it was designed specifically for Arctic operations, which makes the fact that you can find footage of these things being destroyed in Ukraine rather interesting. Because you have a piece of specialized equipment and specifically intended for Arctic operations being pushed into being pressed into service in an environment that definitely isn't the Arctic. So, but yeah, the idea of just having this as a mobile supply point wouldn't necessarily be a bad one. All things considered. S350. Yes, this thing did actually, or I say did, it does actually exist. It's a, if memory serves, I think the S350 was actually something of a collaboration between between Russia and South Korea, of all countries. Mainly as a missile and air defense system. Multi-target 3, missiles per target 2, 250, or you can go to 300 for better missiles, which basically is on par with what the PAC-3 MSC can do. If you said just go with the 9M96 missiles, that's like the regular PAC-3s, but with only 12 missiles instead of 16. So. Alright. And then we have the 23-4. The Shoga. Specifically the 23-4M3 variant, it seems. This was designed to do things like defend Russian armored columns against NATO aircraft, kind of like the Tor was. In fact, I'm not sure if the Tor predates the Shoga or not. I think the Shoga might slightly predate the Tor. You have the Credo Station, which boosts the amount of ammunition you have, and is supposed to represent Shogas as they were modified. Oh wow, it boosts the ground visibility. 2022. But it represents Shogas as they were modified for use in Afghanistan during the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan. The Shoga was found to be very useful because the fact that you can elevate the guns up very high means that you can shoot at people on ridges that are firing down on you. Although, interestingly enough, I thought, and I could be wrong here, but I thought the 4 guns on the Shoga were on 2 separate trunnions, so that when the guns were elevated low to the ground, the bottom ones stuck out farther than the top ones like this. But when they elevated up, that position reversed with the top ones sticking out over the bottom ones. I mean, I could be wrong. That's just what I thought. And to be fair, animating that might have been a bit of a pain, so they might have just decided to put the guns on a single trunnion. Or maybe there was a modification that put the guns on a single trunnion. I don't know. Radar. Or a Shoga with some Iglas. Apparently the mounts don't elevate. I would have guessed that they elevated. Huh. Did I already look through these? I think I did. And now we've got helicopters. The KA-29, which specifically is a sort of attack version of the KA-27, intended for naval infantry use. And yes, that is a minigun in there. Or you've got 2 rocket pods. It's got a decent carrying capacity, decent view range. You can mount the 2A42 if you're so inclined to have another a longer ranged gun system, I guess. Oh, that's only a 7.62 millimeter minigun? I thought it was a 12.7. When you think about it, that actually makes mounting the autocannon a more attractive option. Alternatively, I do suppose you could throw on the gun pods if you really just wanted something with lots and lots and lots of guns at different calibers, which is going to be a bit of a logistical nightmare. Then again, to be fair, you can argue the rockets aren't much better. 40 rockets, 8 of these. Or 8 of these, which are better. But, I mean, at that point, your aircraft is approaching 10, 750, 11, 950. Your aircraft is approaching 200 points for what is effectively a glorified transport helicopter. And it's not durable enough to, it's not especially durable either. So, I can honestly see an argument for just sticking with the rockets. Or maybe even leaving the autocannon at home and just having the rockets. If you still want something that's pretty heavily armed, but then again, if you really did go with something like this, you could go with the gun pods. means 200 points. So. Okay. Oh, wait, no, I already looked through that. And then you have the KH-52K, which is basically the same as the KH-52, but slightly smaller and better optimized for use on board ship. Think of it kind of like the AH-1Z that the Marines use. So. You still have a 30mm autocannon, S-13s, which granted are large rockets and do hit pretty hard. Although, I do have a preference for the S-8s, just because you have more of them. Or more S-8s. And then you also have an anti-radiation missile, which has a long range. 12 of these. So that might be interesting. Or 8 of these Hermes, which are terminal guidance, have a lot of pen, are technically top attack, which is very interesting. With that much pen, those are going to be very dangerous to things like tanks. And, actually, that's a point. Where is the... There it is. Or you can mount a pair of cruise missiles on a helicopter, which I find kind of amusing. I mean, that would be a touch expensive, but it would be a decent anti-armor platform. And then you have the Mi-38T, which is a large, basically transport helicopter. No weapons, not much in the way of EW. So. Next we have aircraft. The AN-72P. This thing does actually exist. In fact, the whole reason why you mount the engines over the airframe like that is, I forget the exact name of the effect, but it helps produce lift on... Basically, it's useful for taking off from short runways. Also, you do have an option for rockets, if you are so inclined. And a gun pod, which granted the aircraft can mount in reality. I'm just not entirely sure why you would want to mount this stuff on what is literally a transport plane. Then again, I say that, and meanwhile the Marines KC-130J Harvest Hawk is sitting over there. But, actually, that's a point. What is the stats for the... KC-130 is slower. Yeah, slower. Although it can carry more guys and way more cargo. So, like, twice as much cargo. Almost 3 times as much cargo. And I think it's only... Actually, I think the KC-130 is only 30 points more when you, kit it out. Yeah, it's only 30 points more. Still can't see ground targets. I would really like to know if it's going to fire all those automatically or if you have to tell it to fire them. The thing is that the AN-72P, if memory serves, can actually carry all that stuff. Wait, what? Do that again? Oh, that's interesting. That slides out of the way. Huh. Alright. MiG-29K. And you basically have it kitted out like a fighter here. 2 fuel tanks, 2 R-77s. Or you can go with 2 more R-77s, but you only have 2 minutes of loiter time. Yeah, decent sensor package. Middle pylons. You can mount cruise missiles if you're so inclined. Although at 430 points, it's going to be pretty steep if you do decide you want to mount the cruise missiles. Although, yeah, you can kind of mitigate that if you set it up like that. You're only, haha, paying 400 points. Although I'm pretty sure this is the closest thing to a fighter that this specialization gets, I think. Yeah, this is the closest thing to an air superiority fighter this specialization gets. So if you want to have a constant combat air patrol, it might not be a good, or it might not be a bad idea to take the fuel tanks. It doubles your loiter times. Doubles your loiter time at the very least. And the aircraft isn't prohibitively expensive. So it's got that going for it, I guess. And then you have the Su-30, which the game seems to treat like a ground attack aircraft. 4 R-73s, 2 R-27ERs, which is the only long-range air-to-air missiles that you can mount. And then, I don't know why it says 4 S-25s, maybe because you have, like... But, you do have a bunch of very large rockets. The outer pylons, if I'm going to be entirely honest, I think I'd be more inclined to do that for 350, and then just have the extra ECM. You do have 4 minutes of loiter time out of the gate, so 4 FAB 500, 2 FAB 250s. If you're so inclined to turn the thing into a bomber. 4 FAB 500s. Inner pylons. I mean, if you wanted to kit the thing out like a bomber, you could do that. 8 FAB 500s, which is roughly equivalent to about 1,000-pound bombs, if memory serves. I'm pretty sure... Yes, 1,000-pound bombs. So what's the stats for these? 36, 120, 65 versus 36, 130, 70. Is that 38? That is 36. That is 38. Technically, that's accurate that the FAB 500 is larger. Mainly because 500 kilograms is not 1,000 pounds. It's actually 1,102 pounds. So, yeah, I mean, if you want to split hairs, technically the... Then again, I mean, it doesn't really matter, I suppose. But I don't really see why people would complain about that much. Even though it's still technically the same size bomb. If you want to split hairs, you could probably make an issue about it, but... nothing air defenses like Patriot aren't going to solve. Or you can have very large rockets. Or, again, 4 of these. To be fair, with 4 minutes of loiter time... Well, these missiles do kind of suck, so... And they are entirely semi-active. So, I suppose that would be an interesting platform. Or you can go with, well, to be fair, you can go with these. Also mount these, which are, where are they? There they are. Which are infrared versions, 2,500 meters. Huh. Hang on. I was under the impression that... Do you get them? No, you do not. R77s, R77s, R73s. Okay, so who does? ER semi-active. I'm looking for the ET infrareds. Here we go. Because I was wondering. Yeah, these have a 3,000 meter range. And yet these only have 25. Then again, these are the R27Ts. And these are the R27ET. So, I guess that does make a degree of sense. Anyway, where was I? Oh yeah, I was looking at that. What are the inner pylons? I mean, you can go with this if you really wanted a full air-to-air platform, and it's not too expensive if you do that. You just don't have much in the way of options for, well, most anything. Particularly ground attack. And then you have the Tu-142. This is basically a navalized version of the Tu-95. Also, if I'm going to be entirely honest, I'm kind of surprised we don't have the Tu-95 in-game. Eight air-launched cruise missiles. Or 1 FAB-3000 bomb. You know, just for messing something up. 6 FAB-1500 bombs. Or 32 FAB-250s. If you really want to do the conventional, for lack of a better term, bomber roll. But the cruise missiles are probably your best bet. Even if individually they're not really super impressive. 40, 70. What is JASM? 60, maybe. Yeah, they're not really impressive compared to something like JASM. Much less if you want to go over here and compare it to the ALCMs. So, like I said, your best bet's probably with the cruise missiles. And then you have the Tu-22M3. And this thing is armed with, I mean, again, it's got a tail machine gun. Actually, the tail gun in this is kind of special. In that it uses a different caliber ammunition than other 23mm autocannons. I think it might be not caseless, but shoot, what's... Dang it. Oh shoot, I can't remember what it's called. Okay, so these are booking it. Damage 70, 100, 250. So they're kind of in between the JASM and the ALCMs. Damage-wise, but they are absolutely booking it, which makes sense because the KH-32 is based off the KH-22. The KH-22 was a Mach 2, I think, at least Mach 2, anti-ship missile that was designed basically to sink aircraft carriers. The KH-32 is a slightly smaller version. I say slightly smaller. It's got a longer range at the cost of a warhead only half the size. Now that might sound like a like a meaningful loss until you realize that the KH-22 had a warhead that was literally 1 metric ton or 2,204 pounds of high explosive. This thing only, quote unquote, has a warhead of 1,102 pounds of high explosives or 500 kilograms only. 6 minutes of loader time, though. That is 10 minutes of loader time. I guess that makes sense if you want to just have your, if you want to just let your missile carrier literally loiter until you need it. And then, what other options do you have? The Central Bombay, 13 FAB-250s, 13 RBK-250 clusters, 24 FAB-500s. Oh, that's interesting. I don't think that we had quite as many options last time. Or no, I think I was thinking of the fuselage bombs. To be fair, for the same price as the Tu-142, you have fewer cruise missiles, even if the cruise missiles themselves individually are more meaningful. 70, 100, 250 versus 40, 70, 175. Then again, the Tu-142 carries nearly 3 times as many. But you can also sort of do what you do. You can sort of do what you can do with the B-52 and have freefall bombs as well, just in case you, you know, you're so inclined to use this thing as a freefall bomber, which you can technically do because it is decently fast, or at least it's faster, rather. Or you could go with, what is that, like 69 FAB-250s, the same number of cluster bombs. Or FAB-500s. Or 2 FAB-3000s, 8 FAB-1500s. Honestly, the cruise missile's probably going to be your best bet. And then we have the Yak-38M. This is actually a VTOL aircraft like the F-35B. The downside is basically that apparently VTOL aircraft aren't supported in this game. And 2.5 minutes loiter. Oh, well, the Harriers are also VTOL. 2.5 minutes loiter time. 2 retarded bombs, 2 cluster bombs. Rockets, Thermal Barracks Cluster, Incendiary. I mean, you can make it into a sort of mini bomber if you so desire. But in all honesty, it's probably best going to be suited as something used to hunt down aircraft like helicopters. And even then, I'm not entirely sure. Yeah, well, I suppose you could whip it out if you're if you've got reason to believe that the other guy's about to use some attack helicopters in a hit and run attack, you could whip this thing out if you have the opportunity, but I'm not convinced. It's slower than the TU-14U. This TU-142. Heck, it's slower than the AN-72P, so you're not getting anywhere fast in this thing. Then again, for only 200 points, it is fairly cheap, I guess. Well, if you kit it out like that, it's only 185 points per. Or 215. Or I suppose you could use it as a mini bomber. What's that? 115 points for the total airframe. Okay, so that was the Coastal. Next is Mechanized, and that will be the last one, I believe. Okay, so this is what I get for making my videos, looking at the specializations, long before I actually post the videos. I made the video for the Coastial Troops back in early July. I think I uploaded it July 2nd or something like that. And then a month and a half later, thereabouts, update 1.09 comes out, changes a bunch of stuff in the Coastal Troop specialization. So now I have to tack this on to the end. Otherwise, the video's information is going to be outdated. Also, it occurs to me that I made my video for update 0.8, or looking at update 0.8, and I tacked that onto my video for Search and Rescue, because I was playing Search and Rescue at the time. And that's not supposed to come out until like the 1st of October, I think. I wonder how many updates between now and then we're gonna have. Anyway, what do we got? 1.09, balance patch. Main menu tab. Localization. What do we got? Server stability, anti-cheat, balance, surrender option, punishment. Restart mission option. This is honestly really useful because there are times where I have wanted to restart the mission just to see if I could do something better. Lobby creation menu, new PvE scenarios for Narva, River, and I'm not even going to try and pronounce that. Design for scenario tab. Select any player and check his loss/kill history in the history tab. Night, day, and morning. Okay, that sounds interesting. I'm assuming that's not going to affect the view range of units. Profile background textures. These textures are unlocked every time you reach your maximum of rank. Disconnect the player won't get any income until reconnection. Matchmaking tuning. Customization frames, anti-cheat, won't mark you as a cheater in campaign mode anymore. It's cool. I don't have any cheats for in-campaign, but that's cool. Edge case preventing reconnect. Fixed an issue where units quantity and... Cancel multiplayer matches, no longer affecting win-loss ratio. Supply labels, MLRS and RD tracer and VFX. Missiles have been stuck in the air. Yeah, this was amusing because apparently enemy anti-aircraft systems would automatically shoot at it, trying to shoot it down, and it would never work. Napalm incendiary area position sink. Fixed would be wing trails, staying in the same position when the wings were folded. I think that means swept, but I can still imagine that as kind of funny. Autocannon angles, which didn't have enough depression and couldn't shoot at small targets at very short ranges. So, does that mean they can now? Fixed vehicles not turning their chassis towards the threat when using some of their weapons, even if the weapons didn't need the help of the chassis to reach its target. So does that mean that the vehicle now, like for example a tank, will only turn its turret towards the threat when it's engaging something, or will it automatically turn the hull towards the threat as well? Because if it automatically turns the hull towards the threat, that'd actually be really useful because it would be turning its heaviest armor towards the threat. I don't know. Mission editor note. Highway of Death map not working multiplayer custom matches. Fixed gold medal being impossible to achieve. Bronze, silver. Self-service mission. The amount of supplies refunded is counted instead of the player's money to win the mission. So I'm guessing instead of... Because the thing about self-service was basically that you needed to gain a total of 3,000 income at once to complete the mission. So now I'm assuming it's only counting the supplies from your helicopters. Because when I completed self-service, I was able to do it by basically mathing it out, so I just refunded all of my helicopters at once. And won it that way. It was a pain. Alright, balance. Active protection system cooldown increased from 5 to 6 seconds. Reloadable RPGs can shoot again before... Okay. That's interesting. If I'm gonna be honest, one thing I'm a little bit interested... Here's the thing. From my understanding in multiplayer, granted, I don't play multiplayer. I can't. I'm not good enough to play a strategy game that you can't pause. People generally doubled up their ATGM launchers anyway, so... Which kind of made active protection systems somewhat moot to begin with. So I'm not entirely sure the point behind that. But, okay. Honestly, I kind of wish they would just standardize all active protection systems on having 4 charges. Incendiary munition penetration value reduced from 20 to 15, resulting in slightly less damage against infantry, but much less damage against armored vehicles with 20 plus top armor. So, basically anything that's remotely armored. Fast cargo planes are now more agile. Okay, I can kind of understand it for the AN-72, because that's not very large, but the C-17 and IL-76? Okay. Helicopter launched anti-radiation missiles are fired in quicker succession. That only honestly counts the AH-1Z with the sidearms. I don't remember if the AH-1W came out sidearms or not. I know it came out AIM-9s, but I'm not sure if it came out sidearms. And the KH-52K, which can mount the anti-radiation missiles. The one that Coastial Troops Specialization. Those are the only helicopters that I know of that can mount anti-radiation missiles. Low altitude bombs, arming distance increased. Changing the position of the strike too close to the target Okay, will result in the plane having to turn around to make a new approach. Okay. Well, I understand the second part, but what does the first part do? Laser range for vehicles increased from 2,400 to 3,000 meters. Alright, well, that's just a general change. General quality of life improvement, I'm going to assume. Kaliningrad multiplayer load a modified data second spawn location for ground units. I have seen people griping about that map. Coastal Troops. What do we got? BTR 90 number of seats increased from 6 to 7. BTR 90 Bachkaha U turret. Look, I can't pronounce Russian things. Made slightly cheaper. That's the BMP-3 style turret with the 30mm autocannon and the 100mm low velocity gun. KH-52K with KH-35. Aim time increased by 3 seconds. Time between missiles increased by 1 second. Iskander ballistic missile supply time reduced to 45 seconds. BRDM... I believe that's the ATGM version, but what I'm trying to think is if that's the one with the Cornets on the regular BRDM turret, or the one specifically with the 5 launchers. I think that might be the one with the Cornets. And the A-22 Bereg direct fire range increased from 13 to 14 against ground troops. And it's slightly more accurate against helicopters. Okay. Next we have motorized. SU-24M2 now has a unique label icon to differentiate it from the SU-24MP. Grad with smoke rocket price reduced to 100. Grad with incendiary rocket increased from 225 to 250. Grad's incendiary rockets has their damage reduced and their DOT duration reduced as well. Grad dispersion doesn't reduce as much when shooting at short distance. I have seen some people talking about this on the Discord, the idea of basically sneaking a rocket artillery vehicle relatively close to the front line, or to a target rather, and then using it to sort of not necessarily shotgun and engaging a target at a relatively close range to dump the rockets on the target, using the fact that the accuracy reduces the closer to the target that you get. Spetsnaz GRU with AT loadout increased by 15 points. So, if memory serves, the Spetsnaz GRU, or they get an option between either 6 RPG-28s, which are just disposable AT launchers, 2 Verbas with a total of 6 missiles, or 3 RPG-28s and 1 Verba with 3 missiles. So this is this, I think, would refer to the one specifically with RPG-28s. SU-25T can now guide two Vicar missiles per target at up to 2 targets, so up to 4 missiles. You know, here's the thing that I would generally be very interested in. Active protection systems do not work against aircraft launch missiles. However, does that include the Vicar from the SU-25T? Because the Vicar is generally a helicopter-launched anti-tank guided missile. The SU-25T, for reference, was a variant of the SU-25 specifically designed for use against armored columns, but that development program didn't go very far, from my understanding. So I'm wondering, can active protection systems intercept these Vicars launched from the 25T? I'd have to look and see if it says it's interceptable, because I know things like the Maverick and its Russian equivalent can't be intercepted. But I'll have to check and see if these ones are, because if they are, that would make it more useful against things like active protection systems, because because you can just sort of, well, you're going to be bypassing the active protection system by introducing a second missile. MiG-29 SMT, R-60 missile price reduced slightly. I think I looked at these aircraft yesterday, and I think the SMT has an option between R-60, R-73, and R-77. And I was wondering why you would take the R-60 over the R-73 because the price was exactly the same. The R-60 just can't. The R-60 is basically exactly the same as the R-73, except has less damage and I believe a smaller blast radius. Heck, it might not even have a smaller blast radius. I think it's just less damage and lower pun. Guard tank. T-15, 30, and 57. And, oh, they nerfed it. It went from 225 and 290 respectively to 250 and 300. That's the ATGM launcher. Or the upgrade for it. Slightly more expensive. Guard, assault troops. I forget how to pronounce that in Russian. Stromoviki, I think. Slightly more expensive. Coastial. Okay, this is interesting. The base went from 220, and the upgrade originally was 30, so that's 250 to 225, and now it's 35 to 260. If memory serves, the 2S7M with the range upgrade is at 170. And they have the same range. Sure, the 2S7M doesn't fire quite as fast, and the 2S7M has fewer rounds, but it can shoot just as far, and it's cheaper, and they are 8-inch shells, so if they land near a target, the target's going to know it. Oh, and they nerfed the price of the toss. Okay. And SOCOM, they reduced the number of AC-130s. I have seen people complaining about something like an AC-130 rush at the start of a match where SOCOM players basically call in like an F-22 and then 2 AC-130s and then just have the AC-130s circle the enemy ground spawns. And, but... So that's probably to help there. Killer Egg Stinger. Okay. Oh, Delta Force CQC price upped from 100 to 110, and the standoff price reduced from 120 to 110. It's interesting that they're standardizing the price between the two variants. RQ-170 price. Okay, yeah, that's fair. The RQ-170 was... I mean, it's a bit... Look, it's strong. Like, it really is. So, yeah, that is kind of fair. Moz, slight price increase there. Pararescue, slight price increase there. To be fair, Pararescue was a pretty cheap CQC unit. And it had flares. The Ranger CQC loadout has an additional law. Rangers RRC. Slightly more expensive to match the standoff. Okay. Armored. Alright, so they're upping the price on the Iron Thunder. Huh. Because I remember comparing the Coastial to the Iron Thunder, and the Coastial was more expensive than the Iron Thunder. Had a shorter range. Had more ammunition. But I think... I can't remember. Did the Iron Thunder fire faster? I'm not sure. So now the Iron Thunder upgrade price is $225, and it's worth noting that the base price of the Coastial is now also $225. So, I mean, I'd still take the Iron Thunder over the Coastial, if only for the extra range. Pack 2 Patriot, 4 missile upgrade. Yeah, that's fair. And, oh, okay, the AMPV, what do we got? 50, what's the base price for an AMPV is 50, so... 135. So now that'd be 145 fully upgraded. The same as a cab, Bradley. I'm not entirely sure the AMPV needed that. Although, that does make the Bradley more competitive, I'd like to point out, because the AMPV and the Bradley, the base Bradley, and the M2A4, the Bradley only costed 10 points less. It had a less effective autocannon. It did have tow, which usually could be considered better than Javelin. Although Javelin could be fired on the move, but the Bradley had nearly twice as many missiles for tow. They had the same durability. Actually, no. I think the Bradley had 1 point more one more point of hit points, health. The Bradley could see slightly farther, and the Bradley had 2 smoke charges instead of 1 on the AMPV. And so now they're nerfing but the AMPV could carry twice as many people as the Bradley. And now they're making the AMPV 10 points more expensive, fully upgraded, which would make a 20-point difference between the AMPV fully upgraded versus the Bradley fully upgraded. So, and the ATACM's supply time reduced to 45 seconds. All right. Striker Cav, what do we got? All active protection system doesn't reduce the speed further compared to the ERA. Okay, that's going to keep them more mobile. Striker ATGM active protection system upgrade price increased by a little bit. SHORAD APM. Okay. So that's 225 fully upgraded. That's 130 fully upgraded. That's 180 fully upgraded. That's from 220 to 125 and 175 respectively. M985 gets 2 extra bunker buster tows per launcher. I think originally it only had tow 2As, so if they're getting tow BBs, that could be useful. And combat engineers now have their own unique unit icon. Did they share one with the I can't remember. Did they share one with the mech engineers? They might. I think they did. Airborne. Airborne squads with standard loadout now carry an extra AT4. Oh, and they're buffing the NGW or the NGSW loadout. B1B pitch rotation speed reduced to avoid suicide in its own nuclear bomb. I think I've seen someone post this on the Discord. And then mech. BTO transport vehicles rate of fire with RPO has been increased. Okay, so they didn't just change coastal troops. They nerfed a not insignificant amount, actually. I'm not quite sure how I feel about that. I think some of the changes were warranted, like the AC-130s going down, the RQ-170 price going up, the PAC-2. Yeah, it kind of tracks for the PAC-2. I mean, if you compare the PAC-2 to basically its Russian counterparts, the S-300V4 and the S-300PM, it was still kind of cheap for what it offered, which was roughly equivalent performance. The AMPV, I don't know about that. And Striker Cav, I don't know. I mean, I do like that the active protection system no longer reduces the vehicle's speed. And I do like the reload time increases for the ATACMs and the Iskander. One thing I'm kind of curious about is if that's... I mean, it says Armor Brigade, so I'm assuming this doesn't include the reload time for the ATACMs on the HIMARS and Striker Cav. Huh. Anyway. So, they nerfed the Grad quite a bit. and they did nerf the T-15, which apparently people can deal with. Like, I know T-15 rushes are a thing, but apparently people can deal with them. Or at least people have developed ways to deal with them. So, this I don't suspect is meant to reduce... I suspect a lot of these changes aren't meant to reduce the vehicle's viability, as it is to reduce their not commonality, that's not the word I'm looking for. Frequency. Or like changes to the T-15. Make it slightly less frequent. Same thing with like the TOS and the Coastial and the RQ-170. Or the AMPV, the PAC, the Strikers, and whatnot. If you wanted to increase or decrease the combat effectiveness, you're going to get changes like what we saw with the Grad here. Or changes like, say, here with the battleship. Though these aren't changes to... Those are changes to increase the combat effectiveness rather than the combat, or rather than the frequency. So, although I find it kind of interesting that they reduced the smoke price for the Grad. I mean, I can see why you might want to take smoke, but I'm not sure why you would. Well, no, I mean, I can understand why you would, but I'm not entirely convinced. That's what I'm trying to get at. Okay, well, all that's pretty interesting. So, I'm going to have to reorganize my decks. I suspect I'm not going to be the only one to need to reorganize my decks. Although I find it kind of interesting that the only specialization they did not touch for the U.S. is the Marines. And and they didn't touch the VDV for Russia. But I find it kind of interesting that they didn't touch the specialization for the Marines, but they buffed the Russian counterpart. I'm not saying that in one way or the other, just find it kind of amusing. But yeah, it seems like largely it was nerfs. I mean, there were a few buffs here and there, but the only specialization that they really improved were Coastal Troops. They did say earlier that they wanted to make the Coastal Troops more viable. And I originally assumed that they meant that just basically by buffing the Coastal Troops. But I suppose you could argue buffing the Coastal Troops and then nerfing some of the other Russian specializations to sort of at the same time. But anyway, I need to tack this on to my Coastal Troops video.